Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar on private funding opportunities for recycling manufacturers. My name is Arlene Iwahiro, and I work for CalRecycle. Alongside me here today, helping me put on this webinar are my wonderful CalRecycle colleagues, Marshall Graham and Frank Severson. I want to review some quick housekeeping items. So all attendees are muted with no video or ability to share their screen. After each session, we will have time for question and answers, and at that point, we will unmute the attendee with a question, or Frank or Marshall will read the questions as submitted via the question feature in the GoToWebinar platform, or as submitted to the email for the LAMD inbox. If you're listening by webcast, you can email your questions to lamd@calrecycle.ca.gov. And if you're listening through the webinar, there's a question feature that we ask you to submit your questions to. If we are unable to get to all the questions, we are committed to ensuring that each question received will be addressed and will follow up with you after the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it on CalRecycle's website. So please be patient as we need time to make this ADA compliant. With all the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce Matt Hennigan, CalRecycle's Deputy Director for the Materials Management and Local Assistance Division, to give this morning's opening remarks. Matt, thank you so much for being here today. Take it away.
Oh, well, thank you, Arlene. I really want to extend my thanks to Arlene, Marshall, and Frank for putting this on and bringing us all together. They emailed me yesterday that said there's 240 people registered for this event today. And that is just a testament to how much this is needed. And I just want to thank them for being the catalyst to bring us all together on this important work. Yeah, my name is Matt Hennigan. I'm relatively new to CalRecycle. And, you know, just by way of background, I hold an MBA, a Master's of Business Administration, which is not a common background I see in state government very often. But I think it's important, especially in this role and in this department and in this industry, to recognize that the importance of the private sector. And CalRecycle and our goals are unique, I think, nearly unique among state agencies, in that we are entirely dependent on the private sector to accomplish our goals. You know, when CAL FIRE wants to put out a fire, employees of the state of California in CAL FIRE uniforms show up to put out the fire. And when the Department of Motor Vehicles needs to increase throughput of issuing licenses and real IDs, they hire more DMV employees. At CalRecycle, we don't recycle anything, which is a point that my 6-year-old has a lot of trouble understanding, right? He thinks I work in a recycling facility, but we in fact are completely reliant on you folks, the entrepreneurs, the business folks, and the investors who are on this call today to address this enormous challenge. You know, I worked in nonprofits for many years, environmental nonprofits, and came to the conclusion there is just simply not enough philanthropic money out there to solve these enormous challenges and build the amount of green infrastructure that's necessary to address climate change and all these other environmental problems. And so it really is going to take the private sector, right? And to put it bluntly, this work isn't going to happen unless somebody's making a buck doing it. It's our job to grow that industry, but someone has to fill in the gap and take the entrepreneurial risk and have the entrepreneurial vision to build this infrastructure, to get these things, get this infrastructure built and process these recyclables into valuable products here in California. So we're relying on you. And the task ahead is enormous. In the past few years, our recycling system and our recycling markets have faced one crisis after another. Import restrictions in Asia, like National Sword and Green Fence, the Basel Convention on mixed plastics, which just took effect in January. Of course, the global pandemic shifting waste flows from commercial to residential almost overnight, and the millions of tons of debris from wildfires that have hit our waste system. Responding to that is an enormous challenge. The statewide recycling rate in 2019 was down to 37% from a peak in 2014 where we reached 50, far from our 75% by 2020 goal. We've seen an increase in the use of single-use disposable products and single-use packaging. We're seeing novel types of packaging that allow increased profits for product manufacturers, but are completely novel and not useful in the recycling system. We've seen a huge increase this year in e-commerce, a steady increase over years, but now this year, so much more e-commerce with much of the packaging not designed for recycling or reuse. And as the pandemic continues, we've seen our recycling systems and markets disrupted in a pretty unprecedented way. However, that brings us an opportunity, right? Where there's disruption, there's opportunity, and a number of moments are converging here to make this the time to modernize our recycling infrastructure and build the circular economy in California that we've been talking about for so long. It's going to take a spirit of innovation, a can-do spirit, but that is what California is all about. And it's been heartening to see California policies already being adopted or talked about at the federal level, right? We are not just playing in our sandbox, we are setting an example for the rest of the country and in many cases the world about what's possible. And we're going to see these policies and initiatives mirrored around the globe if we're successful. So, the opportunity for impact is enormous. It's going to take strong partnerships between the state and local governments and the private sector to do this. It's going to take innovation in the way that we design the products that surround us in our lives and in the systems that we use to reuse those materials. We have a very exciting reuse grant to move to, instead of end of the pipe recycling, to just preventing that waste from ever being generated with these reusable systems. 1383 also presents us an opportunity to, these new requirements for organic waste recycling and also edible food recovery, which we're very excited about. Edible food recovery has been a really animating element of 1383 here at CalRecycle. It gives us a mission to feed our neighbors here in California, and it's really inspired the staff here. Because it's about helping people. But 1383 requirements also present an enormous opportunity to the private sector. A huge amount of infrastructure needs to be built to process the organic waste that we know will be collected due to these requirements. So, I hope you'll keep that opportunity in mind as you hear the presentations from the various funders and programs that speak today. Now we're all, it's going to take all of us working together to build that circular economy, create green jobs, right? And also fight climate change. And again, as much as we like to think here in government that we're the center of the universe, our grant funds are paltry compared to the level of infrastructure needed to process paper, plastic, glass, organics here in California, where we can do it under California environmental laws So it's a much greener and cleaner process. And here in California, where we're providing our neighbors in our community with the jobs that will enable that, economic mobility. Financial support from the state is available. And, we had an entire funding webinar about grants from CalRecycle, loans, tax incentives, and training programs from other state agencies. But today the focus is on private funding opportunities. So you're going to hear about these private funding opportunities. You're going to hear from real world businesses who have used the programs you're hearing about today to finance and grow their businesses, which I hope will be illustrative of the opportunity. And we're also going to provide questions for time for questions and answers after each presentation. So I don't want to take more time. I know it's a jam-packed agenda. I want to thank you all for making time out of your calendars. I mean, and thanks again to the staff for giving us a space to connect over these important issues. And I really, want everyone to be intentional about what we are taking away today. Make those connections, follow up with people after the fact. And, this is just a fantastic opportunity to see all these programs and opportunities in one place. So I hope you'll join me in appreciating the folks who organized it, and have a productive day. Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you so much, Matt, for kicking off today's webinar. We really appreciate it. Now, on to the presentations. Up first this morning is Brandon Moffitt, who is the Vice President of Development for Storm Fisher. He is an industry thought leader with extensive technical and developmental experience in the environmental, waste, and renewable energy sectors. He has experience developing regulatory and industry policy in waste diversion and renewable energy. He has led the development, design, and construction of several complex organic waste processing facilities across North America, and has a deep understanding of the commercial and operational aspects of these projects. Brandon is a professional engineer and has his MBA. He has been active on projects across the state of California. Wow. Brandon is someone that you want to know. Let's welcome Brandon Moffitt of Storm Fisher.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Can you see my screen? I don't think, or not. I don't think you can.
I can't see anything right now. Can you see his screen?
No.
No, we can't see. I can see your face, but I can't see your screen.
It's not letting me share mine. Can you give me? Do
that? I made him a an organizer.
There we go. Yep, we've got you now.
All right. Thank you. So sorry about that. So thanks for taking the time today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our role as a developer and operator, but also on development capital and how to be able to work with equity and debt. And there'll be some presentations a little later on in terms of how debt and equity and other sort of finance can be able to support organic waste projects is going to be our primary focus today. To give you some background, one plant that we've done, not in California, but in Canada, is 120,000 tons a year of source separated organics from residential as well as commercial and institutional sources. And it produces 3 megawatts of electricity as well as around 225,000 MMBTUs per year of renewable natural gas. It also has digestate that gets land applied as an organic-based fertilizer and serves a multitude of different customers. So you can see the facility here on the bottom, as well as the RNG facility to the right, which are all operational and have been for a number of years. But the one thing to note with this type of infrastructure is it's not just sort of set it and forget it. This is a manufacturing facility. We are using organic waste and manufacturing the production of energy, as well as fertilizers, in this case for agriculture and the horticulture industry. Another facility that we've done is a pre-processing facility. So instead of retrofitting an existing transfer station, we built a purpose-built facility which takes around 100,000 tons a year of municipal organics. In this case, what I mean by that is single-family residential organics, and separates the inorganics, so the forks and knives and plastics, from the organic fraction, so then it can go on to anaerobic digestion facilities, it can go on to wastewater treatment plants or on-farm anaerobic digestion. To give you an idea of CapEx, the London facility was around 40 million. This facility is around 15 million. In terms of cost to be able to build, so it's not insignificant in terms of the capital involved. Organic waste projects kind of begin and end with feedstock or the organic waste, and is it separated from the material? So when you're looking to develop the project, whether the municipality, private sector, things like that, and you come to the finance industry, the first thing they're going to ask about is the feedstocks and what are they, how long are they going to come, like in terms of a term, how dirty is the material? These are the types of questions that is going to be asked about it. And so whether we're talking to municipal groups or franchise haulers, there's always tension around feedstock in terms of commitments, because it underpins any financing associated with this type of infrastructure. It's very rare that you'll have a build it and they will come model. That usually leads to peril around the long-term viability of a facility. And it's not lost on the finance industry that in North America, you've had a tremendous amount of restructuring due to overestimated revenues, underestimated costs, and timeframes. So it begins and ends kind of with feedstock, and that's why I wanted to start with that early. To give you an example, here's some different feedstocks that you can see. We've seen tote swaps, going into certain places and swapping out totes in the back of a restaurant. We've seen mixed grocery, there's DPAC. This is a stream that's not well understood and is available in the marketplace. Then you're going to see a lot under SB 1383 with the green waste and food waste mix. There's a lot of knowledge out there in terms of these streams. I'd say BC British Columbia is a really good market to understand this, where the feedstocks were underestimated from a composting perspective, and the composting facilities couldn't handle the amount of food and had odor issues, and they also had contamination issues on their outbound product. So from the finance side, these learnings, it's not like people just focus on California and don't follow the rest of North America. You got to understand your feedstock and what's going to need to be handled. There's liquids. So this is industrial organics, such things as fats, oils, and grease. And then source separated organics could be from restaurants, grocery stores, as well as single family residential. In California, it's more going to be the mix of green and food, I'm assuming. I realize each jurisdiction can pick whether it's a 4-bin, 3-bin, or different setups, but we're expecting to see more in the green waste and food waste. We've got to be really careful around the type of infrastructure that gets built that can handle this in the long term. So people think anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion is a high-level term, but doesn't deal with the specifics of it. So on the top left, you've got a wet AD facility sited at a wastewater treatment plant for co-digestion. You have a high solids facility. So the photo on the top right is a high solids. People think similar to the bottom two photos that these are high solids, which they also are, but they are, one is a tunnel style, which is a batch, and the photo in the center and the top right are continuous high solids. One's just horizontal while the other is vertical. In the back, you've got a farm digester, which is another wet AD style of facility. Now we get into composting. You can have outdoor windrows, you can have gore covered piles, you can have in-vessel composting. There's a multitude of different styles, but you've got to make sure that when they build this type of infrastructure and looking at private finance, that you are hitting the maturity specs with that outbound product as a compost, should you decide to go to this route with raw organics or with the digestate from an AD facility. And so these are some things to really kind of focus on as you're building and developing your infrastructure and engaging with the private sector. Siting. Siting is going to be the biggest challenge in California. Finding the land with the proper permitting to be able to build this infrastructure is going to be crucial. And from a development capital side, which is where we kind of work in, we're trying not to tie up our capital on a piece of real estate. So working with the public sector is an area where we'd like to focus on, whether it's at landfills, transfer stations, wastewater treatment plants, because you need proper zoning, you need a site big enough, and you got to make sure you have the proper site services, water, sanitary, sewer, natural gas, things like that. Because ultimately, I have never seen an organics facility where you didn't have local opposition due to NIMBYism, odor, traffic, and noise. And so this is the groundwork that needs to be done with the private sector working with the public sector to be able to support the development of this infrastructure. So you do have a lot of waste disposal sites. The information is a little dated, but it shows that there's a multitude of sites that could be utilized, but we need to see creativity between the public and private sector to be able to build this infrastructure. And so we've seen some examples of this. Ventura County had put out an RFI looking for someone to build a facility at their location. We thought that was pretty innovative. We've seen Sonoma doing some things, working with the city of Santa Rosa. So these are all good ideas in terms of how to be able to build this infrastructure and have collaboration between the public and private sector. Energy offtake, we're going to see likely more renewable natural gas. It's still in the early stages in California in terms of the ability to connect. And the offtakes, so with SB 1383, there's a requirement for the procurement of whether it be compost, mulch, other products, as well as RNG. And these need to be financeable contracts to be able to bring the private sector in. And so we're going to see some complexities around this where if the jurisdictions look to push this on their haulers, but the haulers don't want to commit to taking the RNG because how much fuel are they actually going to use, this is going to be an issue that we're going to see coming up over and over again. In terms of the offtake of any RNG for use in a particular jurisdiction. Digestate management, you'll get these slides afterwards. There's a lot of information. The big thing to know in organic waste, and whether it be anaerobic digestion or compost, is you have a lot of material that's coming out the back that needs to be dealt with. And all too often, people will view this as being a tremendous revenue source. It is not. It is a very small piece of the pie in the grand scheme of things. Like if you look at your revenues, you're going to be 50% RNG, 50% kind of processing fees, and possibly like 1% going out the back in terms of compost and sort of digestate sales. And so the private sector and private finance knows this. And whenever financial models come into groups like ourselves and other partners, if we see a big slice coming from the offtake of these products, it's usually a bit of a flag for us to be able to dig in more to be like, well, how is this going to happen? Because that's not been the case to date across North America. Permitting, these are the sites, wastewater plants and landfills we think are the shortest pathways. Greenfield MRFs and transfer stations are going to take a long time to go through CEQA and the other permitting. And so time is of the essence to get started on these types of things, because you're likely going to be 4 years before any new infrastructure can get built unless somebody's already got through CEQA now and is in construction. You're talking about infrastructure kind of from $20 to $100 million. That's typically going to take at least a year or more to build, and then you have to commission that infrastructure. So it's going to take time, and working with permitting with state agencies as well as other sort of regulators involved in the state, because you have overlap, as you all know, is a crucial thing to get started on as quickly as you can. I will talk about public-private partnerships briefly, because from the private side, this is something that we're interested in. So either under the Infrastructure Financing Act or an ESCO model are two of the ways to be able to look at. So an ESCO model, you could look at buying the RNG as a savings over, say, diesel. Could be a way to be able to look at things. But here's a couple models that will possibly move out of the traditional RFQ, so request for qualifications or request for proposals, and try to compress the timeframes. And so we'd like to see more of this type of thing used from the private sector working with the public sector to support SB 1383. Here's kind of a bit of a model showing the public responsibility to private responsibility in terms of the different delivery models and where the risk goes for this. But there's a lot of knowledge around North America around P3s about this to make sure that the risk allocation is correct. And this is something that we'd likely to have more dialogue about in terms of how to be able to successfully execute these types of projects between the public and private sector. financing. So you're going to hear a lot today about debt and equity. There are other means to be able to support the project. So whether it be the CalRecycle grants, there's sales tax exemptions. That's something we need to focus on. There's different zones, so new market tax credits, RMDZ loans. There's different ways to get this done. The area that we try to be involved in is on the development side. So the development capital is what's required to get the project to construction. In California, that's probably going to be in the $2 to $4 million range to be able to get a project ready to go to construction. And so that's a role that we play and get involved either ourselves, just developing projects, or working with others to be able to kind of put the work in. So that's doing the legal on the land, that's doing the permitting, that's doing the conceptual engineering, so that equity can be able to say, yes, I'm ready to fund this project. And that's an area that we need to see more focus on. In terms of debt to equity, you can be able to source debt, traditional debt. You can also look at bonding. The one thing to know with debt is that if your project is off at all, you can get really sideways on your financing really fast. Where equity, yes, the returns are higher, but they're more patient and willing to work with you. And you'll hear more about that today. So I'm going to continue on. It's about mitigating the project. So where I'm coming with this slide, and you can take a look at this offline, is stage gating the project. So what I mean is that you do not just start spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on doing the design of a facility. You stage it out so that you really don't put significant dollars in until you're through your CEQA, which I know is its own significant chunk of money, but you got to make sure you don't have any thumbs up, thumbs down situation, because that's burnt capital, and that will cause the private sector to kind of pull back if there's too many failures in the space in California to develop this type of infrastructure. This is my project partners, or my team. So we work across North America and have had lots of years of experience in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly of developing this type of infrastructure. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you so much. We do have a question here from Octavio Vidal, and I'm going to unmute him so he can ask his question. I'm almost there. All right. It looks like you're self-muted. I can just read the question. That's what I'll do. So the question is the digestate that is land applied a positive or negative cost?
It's a negative cost typically. You will see some value. You can, on say a compost, you can see say $10 or more per ton, but it's going to be consumed in terms of the transportation typically to be able to do that. So there is a means to try to be as cost neutral as you can on your digestate, but we typically assume that we are selling the product for a nominal amount, but covering transportation. Other people might have creative solutions to be able to sort of mitigate that cost, which is great, but it's not something that someone's going to see 5–10% of your revenue stream coming from those end products.
Fantastic. And that is the only question that we have for right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yes, thank you so much, Brandon, for that wonderful presentation. Our next presenter is Dr. John Powell, who is the executive director at Closed Loop Partners, a New York-based investment firm that is accelerating the transition to a circular economy. One of John's last travel experiences or excursions before the pandemic hit was to Southern California. And as a resident of Chicago at the moment, he's very eager to get back to the West Coast for some sunshine. Well, John, spring here on the West Coast is beautiful. I hope you can make it here soon. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present Dr. Powell of Closed Loop Partners.
Okay. Should be able to see me now. And Arlene, is my screen visible? I think we're having the same thing here.
I don't see it yet here.
All right.
Think should I make Brandon's still a presenter, so I'm gonna
Okay.
okay, there we go. I think you should be able to share your camera and your screen.
Okay. I believe you can see my main screen. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. All right, here we go. It's wonderful to be with you all today, and I'll overlay the note Arlene made in my intro to say it's a particularly special day. It's my daughter's 12th birthday, and in fact, it was on her birthday that we took our last visits to California. And I think that note rings even more true as I look out my window at a 2-foot thick snowpack outside my door. Quite chilly here in Chicago, but it's wonderful to be with you all today and talk about what we're doing at Closed Loop Partners. So I think I have 3 main objectives that I'd like to get across. First, if you aren't already, I hope to really get you jazzed about the promise and the opportunity with the circular economy. Second, on a very basic level, get an understanding of what it is that we're doing at Closed Loop Partners, and then finally, I've kind of built out the discussion here to put a very fine point on what we hope to do post this discussion to engage with folks all throughout California. So I heard Matt's note loud and clear to really try to create some tangible connections following this to see how we might be able to support. So with that said, we're gonna jump into what we do. As an SEC regulated firm, I do have a disclaimer here. The slide will be posted. I will not read this, but essentially the information here is informational purposes only. So with that said, we'll jump into the heart of the content. So we're a leading investor in helping to build out and to accelerate the circular economy throughout the U.S., although our reach does go beyond the United States. Many of our funders are leading Fortune 500 companies. We'll highlight some of those as we go along. We've built ourselves in a way to create what we call an arc of capital. There are financing needs and financing needs of different types, kind of all across the value chain. And so as we go along, we'll see that we've constructed ourselves in a way that we can try to reach all of the areas within the supply chain, organizations of different types, public entities, private entities, et cetera, to really try to, again, accelerate a transition away from a linear take, make, and waste type of economy to one that is certainly more circular and all the attendant benefits associated with that. So we can group our organization, how we're structured, in really 2 broad buckets, and then I'm going to spend more time focusing on the investment arms that we have at our firm. We have an innovation center where a lot of our research work lives, in addition to large-scale, multi-year, pre-competitive collaborations that are focusing on kind of intractable challenges that are shared by many organizations. And we'll give a couple examples as we go. Within our investment arm, we have a venture arm that is really looking at seed to Series A stage companies and trying to accelerate their growth. And that spans an assortment of different technology types or really areas of need within the circular economy. We have a fashion fund that is focused exclusively on the fashion industry, which is a growth equity type of vehicle. We have the Closed Loop Infrastructure Fund and our Closed Loop Beverage Fund, which are both debt type instruments that we leverage to make investments in projects, again, throughout the US. And then finally, we have a private equity arm, which is called our Closed Loop Leadership Fund, in which an equity stake is taken in middle market companies to help them accelerate their growth. And so we're going to dig into each one of these investment arms here in the subsequent minutes that we have in this discussion. So Real brief before we dig into those investment arms, I just want to take time to give a few highlights about what we are doing as a firm. We were initially founded in 2014 as the Closed Loop Fund, which is now called the Closed Loop Infrastructure Fund. And so we had that debt vehicle, and we recognized pretty early on, after we made successful investments and had some really good traction with our industrial projects, that there was a need to have, again, that arc of capital to cover many areas of the circular economy. At the heart of what we do is incorporating impacts into all of our activities, and we are rigorously tracking various environmental, economic, and social dimensions of all the different companies and projects in which we are investing. To date, we've invested and built more than 48 different businesses and projects throughout North America and beyond. Putting a number on it relevant to the audience here, that's resulted in the diversion of 1.3 million tons of waste from landfill and avoiding about 3 million metric ton CO2 equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions. We're composed of folks that come from an assortment of backgrounds. And so we have engineers, we have startup company owners and former waste facility operators and waste company owners, heads of government organizations, and also finance experts. And we really bring all of that to bear so that we have not only sophisticated investment dimensions in how we approach companies and deals, but then also we have that pure, at our core, understanding of how really the waste system works. And this spans traditional municipal type of materials, organics, et cetera. We really leverage a wide network of partners to help make things happen. And so, again, a lot of our investment activities we are building things, and often we're navigating waters that perhaps have been unexplored. And so we really value the partnership of the academic institutions and research institutions that are discovering new novel materials or building out processes that haven't been employed before that can give us some better outcomes. Sort of at the core of this image that I'm showing here is our team at Closed Loop. In this outer ring is just a small representation of some of the organizations that have invested in us strategically to help build out the circular economy. Certainly, we bring to bear not only our capital, but a large amount of co-investment capital from traditional finance institutions, from state organizations, and other kind of granting and loaning vehicles. And so now I want to dig into our different investment verticals. And so again, I've built this discussion out to really mirror different areas of opportunity that I think will be relevant to folks on this webinar here. So first, I'm going to highlight our Closed Loop Ventures group. The focus of the Ventures group is kind of classic venture capital, in which we're investing in early stage companies that are creating breakthrough solutions for the circular economy. So we'll give you a flavor of some of these companies here in a moment. You know, one central thesis of the Ventures group is that there are inefficiencies within supply chains that can be unlocked and improved so that we can, in fact, enable and create these more circular systems. As mentioned, the company size, organization size that's a target for the Ventures group is those that are at either the seed stage or at the Series A stage. And I've got a few examples of companies in which our Ventures group has invested. There are 19 portfolio companies at the moment. I'll highlight a couple here. One of the first investments of the Ventures group is in AMP Robotics. Those of us in the recycling space know them to be one of the leading robotics, AI-enabled robotics companies that are being deployed at recycling plants and programmed to sort out specific materials, and they do so at very high performance relative to manual labor. We're also an investor in Home Biogas, which is a small-scale distributed anaerobic digestion model intended for use not only at households but also at commercial scale sites as well. And so each of our fund verticals, I've kind of created a deliberate pause. So I want everyone who's on the call, if you're with a startup company that is of a seed stage size or a Series A size, we absolutely encourage you to reach out to us. So I've put my email address here. So take a moment and jot that down. Alternatively, if you're interested in learning a bit more, linking up with one of our venture companies, definitely reach out to me. You can also go to our website and look at our ventures portal to see the full listing of all the different organizations in which we've invested. So, so again, if this sounds like you and you're raising funding, we'd love to hear from you. So, moving on to our closed loop infrastructure group. I co-lead our closed loop infrastructure funds, and so that's where I spend a lot of my time. And so our limited partners or funders comprise the world's largest retail and technology and consumer product companies. We're providing financing through a debt instrument all across the supply chain, spanning collections, sortations, reclamation facilities, and enabling technologies that might live somewhere within one of those nodes or connect those nodes of the network. So we work with both municipalities, so cities and counties and states, but also with private organizations with our fund. Again, making those investments really all across that supply chain. And so in the map of the US you see here with kind of the different shapes and color codings, how we've made investments in collections. And so that might be in collection vehicles or in carts that are being set out outside of, for curbside purposes. Sortation, so that could be the construction of a brand new material recovery facility, or it could be a substantial improvement or increase in their technology stack within an existing MRF. And then we also have investments that we've made within companies that are off-taking, that are purchasing commodity goods that are coming out of material recovery facilities. And some of those are standard and others are advanced technologies that are at the vanguard of creating high-value products that can be reused into other applications, other products, other packaging, etc. We also have, separate from our kind of broad closed-loop infrastructure fund, we have a purpose-built closed-loop beverage fund, and the target here is to augment the supply of high-quality PET containers so that they can be reused into new PET drinking water bottles. And so our funding partner on that is the American Beverage Association, and we're working in close coordination with the Recycling Partnership on this effort, again, to really bolster the quantity and the quality of supply all throughout the US. So similar to our ventures group, I encourage you, so for those of you that are on this discussion, and if you are developing a project, and so you might be coordinating with someone like Brandon, but if you're at a point where you've designed a project, you've sort of lined up, what your financial needs are, and if a debt type of an instrument is something that fits within your capital stack, absolutely encourage you to reach out to us. I didn't give an overview of every one of the attributes of our fund, but I think it is important to note that both our beverage fund and our infrastructure fund are set up to be catalytic capital. And what we mean by that is that for municipalities, the loans that we provide are zero interest with a typical term of 5 to 7 years. And our loans to private organizations are below market rate. And we have a variety of ways of demonstrating below market rate. But again, the intent here is that we are providing catalytic capital to make these projects happen and create the impacts so that the system can be uplifted and we can increase the supply of high quality recovered materials. So again, if you're at a point where you're developing a project and you're looking to satisfy your capital stack, reach out to me and write down my email address there, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. Finally, I want to discuss focus on our final fund here, which is the Closed Loop Leadership Fund. So this is a private equity buyout fund that is effectively targeting middle market companies that are best in class and that are poised for additional growth. And so some of the goals of what we describe for the infrastructure fund are shared within our leadership fund. But again, it's another company size and a different structure ultimately, but for a shared goal of really enhancing the circular economy and creating larger amounts of valuable commodities out into the marketplace. To date, there's been 2 acquisitions that have been made within our leadership fund. One is Balcones Resources based in Austin, Texas, and the other is Single Stream Recyclers located in Sarasota, Florida. And these are really good representations of what the Closed Loop Leadership Fund is trying to accomplish. These are both best-in-class operating facilities and best-in-class people that are really at their core sharing that vision of accelerating a transition to the circular economy with very deep and broad adoption of the latest technologies. As an example, the Single Stream Recycling Facility is the most technologically advanced material recovery facility in the world, for my money, given the incorporation of robotic sortation and other high-end technologies for again creating higher quality commodities coming out the back. So that's an overview of our different funds, and similar to what I've done for the previous 2 funds. If you are on this discussion and you sort of fit into that category of being a best-in-class middle market company owner, and you're really looking and are poised for accelerating your growth, highly encourage you to reach out, and we will see where we take that conversation. So as a final piece in the discussion here, I want to highlight just a couple of things with our research arm, which we call the Center for Circular Economy. And so beyond our investment activities, there's an assortment of challenges that we've observed out in the marketplace when it comes to trying and testing out new kinds of materials, or understanding and developing investment roadmaps and landscapes for either the deployment of new technology or the emergence of new materials and products. So I'll highlight a couple examples of some thought leadership and pieces we've put out, onto the internet. But at its core, what our center is trying to accomplish is, number one, bringing together organizations that have large, intractable, shared problems and developing solutions in a tangible way to try to advance either investment or other innovations to solve these challenges. And then separately, we do take on strategic ad hoc types of advisory services projects, again, on sort of an ad hoc basis as needs arise. So I've kind of covered what the Center for Circular Economy is all about here, and certainly I'll put that note out there to reach out. You can certainly come to our website and look at our Center for Circular Economy webpage. We have lots of reports that I think are relevant to the folks on this discussion, and often we find those are catalytic to really unlocking innovations at kind of the project level. And sometimes that feeds into our investment pipeline. And so I think as a final note, I know several folks on the discussion here are quite keen on developing and building out infrastructure as it relates to food waste recovery and reprocessing, and on some level incorporated within that would be other compostable materials. And so we have some ongoing efforts and activities that we're ramping up at the center that are specific to solutions to the challenges that are posed by scaling food waste recovery and reprocessing solutions. And so I'd highly encourage you, if you are deep in this space and are interested in learning more about those activities, definitely reach out to me at my email address here. So I'm very grateful for everybody's time, very happy to answer questions here, and really look forward to engaging with many of you after this call. So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to any questions.
All right. Our first question is going to be from Joel Robles. Let's see if I can unmute Joel so he can ask his question. It looks like you're self-muted.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. Jeez. Okay, So I'm already a permitted small-scale organic recycler, and that was through a home business. I did vermicompost, and I did on-site composting for people that needed it. I currently purchased 2.35 acres right here in Southern California, and now I'm also establishing a farm because I'm also utilizing what I use. So I'm essentially closing the loop on what I have going on. I just need help to expedite this because I've already had my permits, everything. You know, it's small scale. So I've already got signed off by CEQA, the air board, water board, all that stuff. So now I just need to get to my new address and, you know, just get everything set up already from, you know, more worm bins and stuff like that. So is there like a contact or something that can help me out right here with this?
Yes, I think when I hear you're looking to accelerate now that you've gotten past the permitting process, I'd encourage you to reach out. So I've got my email address shown here, and it'd be great to connect to understand, you know, things between you and you know, getting everything, you know, fully ramped up. So definitely happy to engage further, but that's probably a good first step.
Okay, so I'll email you then.
Great. Making connections here, Arlene.
Love it. We have another question from Steve Loudsey, so I'm going to try to unmute him as well.
Okay.
There you go, Steve.
Great presentation, great panel today, and thank you for your good work in this important area. My question was whether you work directly or do you compete perhaps with the Remade Institute or Clean Tech Open to identify potential startups in source reduction, waste diversion, et cetera?
That's a great question. We are extremely collaborative, and I can speak specifically. In fact, going, you know, way back into graduate school, I've got many contacts who are on the Remade team on the academic side, and we have certainly been engaged not only with Remade but many of the other efforts I mentioned earlier. The Recycling Partnership. They are a very different model from us, but we have a shared values and shared vision, and work in very close coordination with organizations like that, and many more that I don't have the time to mention. But you know, I think, you know, philosophically, it's not it's not our intent to do every single deal. We don't have the ability to do that. We want to see things happen, and you know, at the end of the day, we are looking to create a tangible manifestation of the circular economy and through our activities. And again, a lot of that comes about through important collaborations that we have with other organizations. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Powell, for your wonderful presentation. We really appreciate it. You did spark a few more questions that we'll be forwarding to you that we just don't have time to get to today, but we wanted to thank you so much for your time this morning.
Well, thank you so much. You've done a bang up job organizing this. It's been fantastic, and that shouldn't be lost on this audience. So thank you.
Awesome. I hope all those connections are made. So
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next, we have a project example that helps bring to life how a project can utilize multiple funding sources to make things happen. So if you tuned into last month's public funding webinar, this project used both public and private funds to help complete their project. With that, I introduce John McNamara, CR&R's Vice President of Environmental Compliance. With over 30 years in the industry and an expert in the solid waste facility compliance, John brings hands-on knowledge of how to manage the environmental compliance challenges facing communities and municipalities. He's a licensed professional engineering geologist with a Master of Science in Geology and Hydrogeology. John's years of experience in education assist him in the day-to-day operations of a complicated solid waste services environment in order to achieve optimal balance of compliance and operational services for their clients and constituents. Join me in welcoming John McNamara of CR&R.
Thank you, Arlene. It was very nice. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yep, we can hear you and we can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to be talking about the anaerobic digester that CR&R designed, built, and operates in Paris, California. It's in Riverside here in Southern California area. And at full build out, it will be processing over 330,000 tons per year of organic waste that was otherwise going to a landfill. And in the photograph or the artist rendering, you can see the overview of our entire facility with the digester on the right side. Just give you a brief snapshot of what our company does. We're a traditional solid waste company that provides solid waste collection services for cities, municipalities, both for residential, commercial. And as part of that, we operate transfer stations, material recovery facilities, composting sites, transfer stations, and landfills. And what I'm going to be talking about today, and of course, we have about 1,000 solid waste collection vehicles in our fleet. About over 400 are operating on renewable natural gas right now. And today I'll be talking to you about the Anaerobic Digester project that we put into operation almost 3 years ago, April 2018. Our project's different than I think the previous presentation. Was probably a good thing. We self-perform this project, so we put together the funding through our own lending institutions that we work with, and we are the project developer. We have 50 acres that we had owned, and we did all the permitting, CEQA and whatnot, engineering in Paris, and then put together a team to design, build, and operate the AD system. Our primary partner in the project is Eisenmann, a German company that is expert at building digesters specifically for green waste type materials that we've designed this facility for. In addition to that, we have two companies that helped us with the gas upgrading, Green Lane Biogas, experts at cleaning the gas to make it so it's usable in a CNG truck, and then SysAdvance that helped us to get the gas to the quality that could be injected in the pipeline. So we partnered with Southern California Gas Company to connect to the pipeline, and that was in April 2018. We're the first private company in California to ever do that in the history of the state. We're really proud of that accomplishment, and there's many others that are coming online now, but we're proud of the work that we did to get that accomplished. It was a very difficult project to do, and we did it all internally with our own staff and our own partners. And we had a project engineer, experts at building or designing and engineering these types of facilities, J.R. Miller. This is just to show you a real rough schematic of the project, and CR&R again self-performed everything on the chart other than where the gas is going through the distribution pipeline. But we collect the waste, we process it, pre-process it, put it through the digester, and then go through the gas cleaning, gas upgrading process, both for our trucks or for injecting in the pipeline. And then in addition, developing the soil amendments and the compost amendments that go out to our customers. We're performing all that for the project. And so some of the reasons why we chose this type of a project for the organic waste. Here's a slide that shows some of the state laws. So this is the top row of the slide showing various state laws that directed us towards organic diversion technology like this, including the AB 1383, which just went into effect for short-lived climate pollutants, but others that require organics diversion from landfilling and recycling and greenhouse gas reduction. In the middle of the slide, you see that there are incentives coming from the government, including low carbon fuel standard here in the state and the RIN credits from the federal government, and also sales tax exemptions for making the fuel renewable natural gas. And in the bottom row, you see we were successful at obtaining several large grants from the state through different organizations, government agencies within the state to assist with the funding, and that contributed to about 10% of the funding, but those have been extremely important for us because it shows support from the state and partnering with the state, with the CalRecycle, as well as others who are involved in this effort to try to reduce greenhouse gas and divert organics from landfilling. And why did we choose this type of technology? It performs the best out of any other technology application in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. The carbon intensity is based on California Resources Board's own calculators. We're far below electricity, hydrogen, CNG, and diesel, and basically at this point we're at zero. And so for the fleet that has been transitioned to renewable natural gas, we're operating a greenhouse gas neutral fleet at this time and have been since we started producing the RNG. In addition, when you compare to landfilling, where you can get some energy recovery and emissions capture, and composting, you can get nutrient recovery, but they don't match up to anaerobic digestion, where we get 100% energy recovery. We're completely enclosed system, so we have 100% emissions capture and 100% nutrient recovery. It's by far the best option for performing environmentally for the purposes of waste reduction, organics diversion, and methane capture and a reuse. And of course, we're displacing diesel by replacing our diesel trucks with CNG vehicles. The next set of slides, it's all just pictures, which is more fun. So this is the facility under construction, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. You can see it's a very, very complex project and heavy duty construction project in order to build the digester facilities, and takes a big team. There's a very, very complex project requiring engineers and experts in construction to put this together. And again, we self-performed all this. We're really proud of the outcome of the project, which is what you see in this slide. So about 3 years ago, first phases 1 and 2 were completed, and we started operating a digester to divert organic waste and begin creating the products, the gas, the liquids, and the AD compost. In addition, I think some of the commenters, some of the presenters earlier talked about the need for getting good product quality. So we built an entire material recovery facility just for the organic waste. Pretty unusual. It's dedicated only to bring in the green organic waste that we bring in, so we can process it, remove contaminants, and then feed good quality material into the digester, because what you put in is what you get out. That's a key part of the project. And then in addition, this is the gas cleaning system, both the Green Lane, Assist Advance. Green Lane was able to put in a system that gives us RNG that can be used in our trash trucks. And then Assist Advance, which is the containers on the left, allow us to inject that gas by further cleaning it and meeting all the Southern California gas requirements for injection into a gas pipeline. And of course, the key part of this whole system is that we have converting our fleet of trucks from diesel to natural gas. We're in that process. Our goal is to convert all of our trucks, our entire fleet, to our collection fleet, to renewable natural gas. And then the goal on the processing side is to continue to increase our green waste and organics diversion into the AD system, increase the production of biogas, and in theory, we will be able to make enough renewable natural gas to fuel our entire fleet. So a very good example of a completely closed loop system where we're collecting the waste, we're processing the waste, we're manufacturing the gas, and we're using it in our trucks to go back out and collect the waste. And we've been doing that for the last 3 years with over 400 of our CNG vehicles already in use now. That ends my presentation. I'm glad to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I don't think we have any questions. I'll just wait just a minute here. Again, if you do have a question, use the question feature in the webinar. Well, if any get forwarded to us, we'll go ahead and forward them on to you. But at this
That'd be great.
time,
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
we appreciate you, John, for your wonderful presentation this morning.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
So you're in luck. We have another project example to share. I'm going to share my webcam fast. Sorry. There we go. We have another project example to share that also use multiple funding sources. We're sharing these examples with you today so you can see the possibilities and to show you that it is doable. We are privileged today to have Mr. William Skinner join us from Hitachi Zosen Inova. Their state-of-the-art high solids anaerobic digestion facility in San Luis Obispo County has been converting organic solid waste into carbon neutral biogas and high-grade natural compost since September of 2018. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. William Skinner.
Thank you. Thank you, Arlene. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to present a little bit about our facility, and talking with Arlene earlier, trying to get more of a feel for the funding for these types of projects. Very somewhat similar to like what John was mentioning, you know, the type of project that that CNRR has done, which is just a super project down in Southern California. Just a little bit about our company, just so you know a little bit about who we are and what we do as a general rule. Our company was founded in 1881, Hitachi Zosen Corporation, which is based out of Japan. Their primary focus in the past has been industrial and engineering and the waste, environmental, and business sectors. Hitachi Zosen Inova, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of HC Corporation, has been a leader in energy and waste solutions for for nearly 4 decades. Our offices are headquartered in Zurich, Switzerland, with other offices in Germany, Italy, Slovenia, Sweden, China, Australia, US, and Canada. And we have proprietary products. Let me get this out of the way here. Just regarding incineration, anaerobic digestion, which was what we'll talk a little bit more about today, renewable natural gas processing, and we're looking into other things with methanization, hydrogen, and CO2. We have roughly 500 reference projects across the world, 90 AD plants currently that are in operation, and 100 of the biomethane upgraders. Here. Oh, come on. 1 second. Next screen here. Oh, sorry about that. So just a little bit about our project in particular. So similar to like CNRRs, you know, this was a project that Hitachi, this is our first one in the United States. This was a finance, design, build, own, and operate digester facility. And as Arlene mentioned, we're in San Luis Obispo. One of the things, 2 of the things that we'll talk more about as I go on here about this securing of organics. I mean, a lot of you know, the producers, you know, whether it be cities or municipalities, certainly want to be able to go to these types of projects, but without these types of agreements already in place, it's really hard to be able to provide financing for these. When you're talking to whether private equity, banks, or internal equity, however that works, is these types of the organics processing side of it and the securing of the agreement needs to be in place in advance of these things actually moving forward. Also with us, on this one in particular, we did a 20-year power purchase agreement with PG&E through the Biomet program, which is the renewable energy program with under the with PG&E. And this was also completed actually before a lot of the process was done in terms of construction and the plant was up and running. We went through a number of opportunities during the permitting side of this to look at how the project was going to be funded. A portion of it was through the CalRecycle, through the greenhouse grant reduction program. There was a $4 million grant that we were able to secure with that, and that grant actually will just be completing in April of this year. I'm currently working on the final reports for that. We also had a grant through the California Energy Commission through the electric program and investment charge program. People know it as the EPIC program, which again is creating electricity from a renewable source. A lot of those are familiar with wind and solar, but this one was strictly through organics. We also, in this case, took advantage of the investment tax credit program, which is a federal program. It's 30% of eligible construction costs. So, in a project that's, $20 million plus, that's a huge advantage for our company to be able to do that. But it's, again, with that one, it's the trick of finding the proper investor who, is looking for those types of tax credits that's willing to invest in a project. Those were very common with wind and solar, which those are what they're very familiar with in those types of in the investment tax credit program. Biogas projects like ours, not so much. So there's a lot of education in terms of working with the investor, so they understood what we were doing. Also, in this case, taking advantage of the Kaifa Program, the California Alternative Energy and Advanced Transportation Financing Authority. That's a mouthful. But when going through the construction side of the program, this is a sales tax exemption option. So when you're spending, millions of dollars on equipment coming into a facility, that suddenly turns into a sizable money-saving option for us. And for us, for this facility, it was close to $1 million actually. Private financing, MUFG Bank in Tokyo, Japan, which is our main financing arm. Like I said, our company is based in Osaka, Japan. So they have a lot of very close relationships with banks in Japan, as well as some company investment. But one of the things that, being a California person and, working for a Swiss company with the Japanese ownership, is that learning that these are very, very conservative entities. The Swiss are very conservative and the Japanese are as well. So in terms of them looking at how they're going to finance these types of things, we have to make sure that that everything is ready and moving forward and really above board with them to make sure that they have a very high level of comfort in terms of investing in these types of programs. Some of the keys to successful financing. I know Brandon touched on this a little bit earlier in his presentation. Site selection, especially in California, is one of the most difficult things to be able to do. To be able to determine a site selection early and the environmental planning that's tied into that is just, we can't, as a person who's done this type of work, on the permitting side of things, I can't stress that enough. I mean, we're looking at other projects now, trying to determine sites, and it is a lot of work. And working with, depending upon the area that you're going to be in, the NIMBY issue, we ran into that a little bit with San Luis Obispo, not so much because we're located in an industrial area to start with. So our biggest neighbor is the airport, which is right next door to us, who had no particular issues with us. But, residents that are 3/4 of a mile away, it's about educating them about the type of project, odors, and those types of things. So that's really, the early site selection and that opportunity to be able to move those things forward as much as you can prior to, some of the things with grant submissions, with financing and other things to be able to make sure that that stuff is clearly in place. I think that the fact that we already had our site selected, we had our CEQA completed, we had feedstock agreements in place, we had other things that, some construction that was already started helped secure our success rate with both CalRecycle grant and with the EPIC grant with CEC. Public support, elected officials, environmental groups, and regulatory agencies are all things that happened at the same time. We had great support from the San Luis Obispo Board of Supervisors. The supervisor in our particular area was really, really keyed into this. UC Davis, or not UC Davis, Cal Poly, which is right next door, within San Luis Obispo, was really, very much interested. In fact, we still do tours with their engineering students on a regular basis. Some of the regulatory groups, agencies, APCD in particular, in terms of air quality, who had never permitted a facility like this in the past. So there's a lot of, they're looking at what other facilities had done around the state and looking at how ours is going to act. I mean, in terms of what they're actually going to regulate, the combined heat and power unit, the biofilter, the flare, and if there's anything else that emits, that has emissions on site. So it's a lot of education for those types of groups that have never seen one of these things. And secure feedstock and offtake agreements. I mean, that was a key part, again, in making sure that the financing all went appropriately, to make sure that we had offtake agreements for electricity, that we had secure feedstock. Our partner, Waste Connections, that's in this particular region, is the sole hauler. And, I did presentations to 14 different entities where they have their franchise agreements to be able to tell them who we are, what we do, and the type of work that that will be done in the future. So those types of things are key to making successful project financing and getting all the places, getting all those guys on board. And that's it today. There's a couple of websites here to our facility here located in San Luis Obispo that talks more about that, and also our company's website as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Mr. Skinner. We don't have any questions at this time, but I'm just going to wait a few minutes. Sometimes they trickle in a little bit after. Again, if you do have a question, you can use the question feature on the GoToWebinar, or if you're joining us by webcast, you can use the LAMD at calrecycle.ca.gov email if you'd like to submit a question. Okay. Well, then we don't have any questions for you. Thank you so much for your presentation this morning. We really appreciate it. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. Next, we have John Dannon from Generate Capital today. Generate Capital looks beyond the traditional private equity fund model in its quest to solve what it sees as the biggest challenge of sustainable infrastructure: investing, aligning the interests of infrastructure projects stakeholders. It's my pleasure to introduce to you John Dannon with Generate Capital.
Hi there, Arlene. Hi, everyone. Can you guys see me? And on my screen?
Yes, we see the Let's Get Started screen. I can see you on camera. We don't see your presentation.
So let's see. If I pull my presentation onto slideshow, bear with me. Let's see what happens. Do you guys see that presentation?
Perfect. Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
Excellent. It's not nerve-wracking, this part. Hi, everyone. My name is John Denan from Generate Capital, and I lead the organic waste team at Generate. And I'll take a few minutes to introduce Generate Capital and what we do. And I'll try and I've been listening to everyone's presentations, and I'll try and keep it in context relative to everyone else that's spoken to sort of help explain where we play. Going all the way back to Matt's opening comments that there needs to be, private sector solutions for a lot of these environmental goals that we have, and that is the exact reason why Generate Capital was founded. What is Generate? About 7 years ago, Generate Capital was founded as a private company. So not a fund, just a regular company designed to basically own and operate renewable and sustainable infrastructure, and specifically new modern infrastructure, meaning distributed, decentralized, digitized, and democratized. Basically, a good way to think of it is not giant monolithic power plants, but the new age of distributed smaller power plants. So for example, and when I say, I mean renewable energy sustainability projects. So for example, instead of a large solar plant in the desert, community solar or commercial and industrial solar plants. And that, energy efficiency projects within buildings, things like that. And so for the last 7 years, that's all that myself and my colleagues have been doing and continue to do. And Generate Capital operates across, broadly across all of sustainability. So as you can see on this slide, sustainable power, sustainable mobility, and sustainable waste and water. And I lead the organic waste business within Generate, and we'll talk a little bit about that, what that means, and how we play in the market. So I'll go to the next slide. To give everyone a sense, when we're talking about these small scale projects, they quickly add up, right? So it may cost hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to build that big scale solar plant in the desert. And that's relatively easy for capital and investment money to get around. Like it's that's what, when you hear about infrastructure funds, that's what they're designed to do. But that's not necessarily the most sustainable or efficient way, going forward, given the new technologies and things we have at our disposal in society today to be creating power anymore. And so that's why Generate is focused on, super sustainable, decentralized projects, and that leads to having over 2,000 assets in our portfolio. And so this sort of fun graphic here is sort of a pictograph of where some of our assets are. It's kind of hard to pick out where things are, but there's 2 dots underneath the Great Lakes, or a lot of the dots around and underneath the Great Lakes are actually our food waste and dairy waste digesters. But I'll talk about those in a bit more detail shortly. Generate is a private company. Before I go into the we believe waste shouldn't go to waste piece, I'll talk about what we do. We're an investor, owner, and operator, and so let me distinguish that from Brandon and Stormfisher. They're a developer, and in fact, Generate Capital works with Stormfisher, as this we'll talk about a little bit. The closed loop team, and there's a great presentation earlier, is also an investor, but typically, as you heard, in sort of corporate investments by companies, and at an early stage, trying to catalyze new industries and new technologies. Generate Capital is an infrastructure investor, so we invest typically in hard assets, which means projects more so than corporates, or facilities is a way to think about that. We're not a technology investor. We will invest in innovation as it relates to business models. So there's a lot of proven technologies such as anaerobic digestion, that are out there and have great commercial applications, as we've seen from the great presentations today from both CRNR and Hitachi, but often don't have a great business model and have had, failures before, and it means that the broader investment community is not focused on them. And so that's a great way to segue into, we believe waste shouldn't go to waste. And so in the vein of upcycling and many of the things that were discussed about earlier by closed loop, Generate is driven by those same sort of mission values. Our specific mission is to make a private sector profit and return, though, and to make those business models work. And so I'm going to focus my conversation on organics today, less so than call it black bin waste and normal waste that folks think about. So moving ahead, just to give everyone a sense, so we're an owner-operator of 10 assets in North America that process organic waste. And that's a mix between what I call really the food waste market and the animal waste market. And we've been building this portfolio of assets for the past 5 years. And really, we're probably the largest dedicated investor in organic waste in the country. I think a good data point is that sort of within our food waste fleet, we have the capacity to manage about 500,000 tons a year, and that's been growing steadily. And in our animal waste assets, we don't really measure it in tons per year, but if you turn the manure that flows through the projects that we support, it's like 2 million tons worth of manure. It's a very large amount. It's we think about it in gallons, and it's millions and millions of gallons. But that's just something to think about. But our fleet is essentially taking a lot of waste and turning it into a lot of valuable energy, whether that's electricity or renewable natural gas. We do both. In some cases, we do both on the same site. But that's what we do. Increasingly, Generate Capital is stepping into the operator role. One of the things about the organic waste market is it's an early industry in the US. It is still evolving, and there's only a handful of capable folks like the Stormfisher team to operate sites. And so, we're increasingly operating sites ourselves, as well as with our partners. And we're active in the industry, as evidenced by being here today to talk about what we're doing, and hopefully help give some folks some clarity around parties in the market like ourselves. But we're active in many market organizations, so American Biogas Council, Renewable Natural Gas Coalition, Biogas Association of California, Canadian Biogas Association. We're active in all of these, and we're really trying to help support policy around the country, whether it's New York, CTI, which is their equivalent of LCF, or the SCFS, or the Washington LCFS. We really want to see this industry proliferate and grow. And we're also trying to raise the bar for a bunch of standards, whether it's operating standards or creating new off-taking markets for credits, or for, frankly, nutrients and digestate. The discrete pieces of the business model that need work. We're working on all of those. So I'll pause and take a breath, and I'll do a quick tour through some of our assets, and then give some thoughts at the end on what's necessary for project funding. So we look at organic waste and we say, hey, there's actually a couple of businesses within organic waste. So actually there's several. Like, what is organic waste? Well, animal waste is one type of organic waste. Food waste is another. Human waste is another. Wood waste is another. And all of these different waste types generally are generated and collected differently, and generally that leads to different business models. And so, we have a large presence in the animal waste and food waste markets. We own two of the largest dairy to RNG projects that are located in Indiana, and they provide RNG into the California vehicle market and create LCFS credits. We also own a smaller dairy project in California that creates electricity, but is is in the process of activating a pathway for LCFS. Will also play into that market. We are, so we're a leading owner of animal waste. We're also a leading owner of food waste assets. And you may recognize that picture on the top right. That's the London, Ontario digester that Brandon was showing earlier. So Generate and Stormfisher are partnered on that facility, as well as the facility underneath. And I should actually update that rendering with a real picture since it now exists, I realize, the Drumbo, Ontario Resource Recovery Center. And it's interesting because the CR&R team mentioned the great idea to build a dedicated pre-processing facility. Well, that's what that resource recovery center is. And I think we're going to increasingly see that either existing transfer stations or MRF sites in California for SB 1383 getting converted or dedicating space to organics separation and processing. It's going to be a key piece of sort of the infrastructure needed to move from collections to slurrying to ultimate disposal, particularly with constrained sites, which is what we're sort of seeing in California. But coming back to what we do, we have really 7 assets focused on food waste. 5 of those are digesters. One is a on-site wastewater treatment center at one of the vineyards in Napa County, and another one is the Drumbo, Ontario Pre-Processing Center. The rest are digesters. 3 in New York State, 1 in Michigan, 1 in Ontario. We've been looking at many digesters in California and want to get more involved. I myself was a resident of California for the last 4.5 years and just moved back to the East Coast this summer. And so I have toured up and down dairy sites and food waste sites throughout California in the last 4 years. Just moving ahead, we're also entering into the wastewater and biosolids treatment industry. We have a strategic partnership with a company called Cedron Technologies, and they have a dewatering system that is incredibly efficient and incredibly effective for all liquid waste streams. So it doesn't have to be food waste. It could be, frankly, chemical processing waste or whatnot, or obviously wastewater and biosolids, per the title of the slide. We believe this technology could be helpful in California for 1383 as it relates to existing POTW sites. Essentially, what this technology can do is remove the need. Well, it basically, instead of having a biosolids cake at the back end of a POTW, you don't have anything. You have clean water, commodity grade aqueous ammonia, and a very, very small amount of dry product. So instead of having truckload after truckload of biosolids cake being hauled away to be disposed, you won't have any, which would be great. And what that also does is it should, in theory, free up some on-site capacity within POTWs as well. So we're hoping that there's a way to combine facilities that slurry organic waste with equipment like this and more digesters to free up existing capacity at existing POTWs in California. And that sort of dovetails a little bit with the P3 model Brandon was talking about. And, as we think about 1383 and compliance, really the biggest constraint is sites and permits and CEQA, and all of this has been discussed already today, so I won't go into it. And that just makes folks like myself think, hey, we've really got to use the existing infrastructure as fully as possible. And that's where I think ideas like more transfer stations and backhaul type facilities like this one on this page could be very useful. But before I go and just talk about a couple of key things around project funding, I'll just touch on a couple of team points. We have a large and growing team dedicated to organic waste investments. I'll skip through the people. We don't need to introduce them all, but these are all the folks that are in head office, or what formerly was head office before COVID hit. And then we have about 70 plus staff at the site level. But we really, I think, probably have, from an investor perspective, the largest dedicated team focused on the, broadly all of the organic waste sectors, animal waste, food waste, human waste. So that's the introduction to Generate. I'll talk a little bit about project funding, but then frankly would leave it open to questions. I think some of this may be strange to some of the audience, or new, or interesting to hear that there's a company that actually dedicates itself to this. But various of the presenters today have talked about what does it take to get a project funded. I think one thing that's worth positioning as a background to all of this is we're in a really interesting time in the world where there's probably more money available to invest in things than ever before in the private sector, and that's a result of policies for the past decade or so, and so that doesn't mean that everything gets built and paid for. It just means that there's probably less of a need for public sector capital going forward. But projects need to have the basics, and I like to think of it about as a stool, and there's 3 or 4 legs to a stool. And so the first one is sites and permits, and we've talked about that today. I don't need to go into those. The next one is as we talk about any kind of waste upcycling or waste processing project, feedstock is the life of the project. It's what you are transforming to make the products out of. And so having contracted feedstock is key. And I think in the context of California and SB 1383, and I've been having a number of conversations with some municipalities and other agencies and entities, I think the more that the municipalities who ultimately have to, the cities, the towns, the municipalities who have to make and comply with 1383, the more they can put compliance into their hauling arrangements and agreements, and sort of mandate separated collection, or if there's a facility nearby that the hauler has to take it to, the more that those contracts can be upgraded to help the municipalities comply with 1383, the better. And some of those have to wait until contracts are up for recontracting, but to the extent the municipality has the ability to do it today, they should really be thinking about it and doing it. Otherwise, projects are not going to get contracted feedstock, and folks like myself are not going to invest in them. That's just the sad fact of it. So you need sites and permits, you need contracted feedstock. Operations, I think a lot of the folks have touched on it today in the case studies. You really need to know what you're doing. These are manufacturing facilities. These are not set it and forget it. These are complicated processes where there's collection of waste, materials handling of waste, treatment of waste, and then creation of energy. And so there's a lot of regulators, a lot of regulation, a lot of equipment, a lot of moving parts, a lot of stuff going on there. And so you really need to have operating partners, not operating professionals on site running these facilities. And so that's a big constraint in the market today, like I said at the beginning. Then lastly, you need contracted offtake. I mean, within the context of California, you don't need contracted offtake, but you need visibility to selling your products, I think is probably a better way to say it. Within the context of California, obviously CARB has created the LCFS, and we've had CRNR talking about creating RNG, and all these things are working through the LCFS system, which is a great incentive system. Otherwise you could be trying to get a PPA with one of the utilities, or maybe even a biomat tariff. But also these facilities will make tip fees. And so long as the contracted feedstock is there and the visibility of the sales are there, the financials should be able to hang together. And now we sort of move away from the legs of the stool to the funding of a project. I'll just quickly go back. When I say contracted offtakes, these projects create products, energy, whether it's electricity or RNG, but they also create some byproducts like digestate. And we had a question about digestate earlier. And Brandon answered it very nicely. I would say in the US, in all of our US projects, Digestate is a cost. We technically do sell it, but it doesn't cover the transportation and land application of it. US developers in California should be thinking of that as a cost, unless you have some very clear and contracted ways to get rid of it. So I just want to make that clear to anyone listening who's a developer. It's you know, we don't, all of our facilities pay to get rid of Digestate at this point in time, and absent technological investment or something else, that will stay that way. And every single project I've ever looked at, it's been a cost in the US. So I really want to make folks understand that on the development side. You know, it can be made into a revenue, but it requires a lot of capex, and typically the return on that capex investment is not worth it to date. So I just wanted to touch on that one. So moving away from sort of the basics of what is required for a project to get funding, like how should that funding actually work? And I'll go back to the segue I made here, which was, you know, I think public money and grants are great and really helpful. The biogas industry has seen a lot of projects that were built exclusively on public money, and that is not alignment in any way at all. That just means a developer gets a lot of money, builds a project, and has really no long-term alignment. Generate Capital likes, whenever we partner with operating partners, you know, we look for, and sometimes this is the developer who becomes the operator. We incent them in the performance of the project. We pay them for their development work, but if they're going to operate, whether they developed it or not, the operator has to be incentivized in the performance of the project. And so that's the key piece of you know, making these things work long term. So in terms of funding, public funding is great for the developers in the early stages to get those sequels paid for and those other, call it, expensive and binary risk items. That's where public funding can be really well used in this industry, because those time periods could be 2 to 3 years, and it could be, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and that's where there's a real risk and a real pinch point today. If a project gets its permits and looks good and has contracts, it will get funded. There is an abundance of private sector capital. So if I'm talking to the audience today that's government agencies and thinking, hey, where should we use our resources? I'd say it's less on creating new grant programs, you know, other than those focused at the early stages and developers. And it's really on how to expedite availability of sites, time to getting permits, use of existing infrastructure, whether it's existing transfer stations, existing MRFs, existing wastewater treatment plants. I think that's really where folks need to, you know, folks within the government agencies need to be focused in California, particularly to meet the SB 1383 deadlines. Covered a lot. Hope there's some questions. Thank you, everybody. Arlene, back to you.
I'm sorry, we were having a little bit of technical difficulties. We do have a couple of questions for you, John. I'm just going to go ahead and read them. Share my screen. The first question is, does Generate consider funding ancillary projects like food dehydrators that produce soil amendments that can be composted?
Yeah, I mean, we consider everything. Whoever that is, please find me on LinkedIn, or my email is john@generatecapital.com. The answer is yes, and we obviously have a fleet of existing digesters that have digestate costs, and to the extent there is a technological solution that is, you know, accretive, you know, we'd love to hear about it.
We will connect you with, it's Kelvin Garvan, I believe is the name. We will connect you with him, who is the person that asked the question.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Our next question comes from Nicole Ty. Do you fund small reuse projects?
Small what project, sorry?
Reuse projects.
I don't know what that is. What, reads or?
Reuse.
Oh,
like
reuse.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't. I think I need a bit more specificity. Reuse of what feedstock, what's small, what's reuse. I think that one needs a bit more clarity. In general,
we're trying to go ahead and unmute Nicole so she can ask her answer, maybe give you a little more context.
Hi, John. This is Nicole Ty. I'm with Green Links. We're a small reuse company. We do deconstruction, which was one of the things in one of your first slides. And we are a building materials reuse company. So we're really small and we are hoping to get bigger. And we deal a lot with lumber and unknown cola. So our feedstock is generally wood, and we try to keep it within the reuse sector, meaning that it gets reused, remanufactured, upcycled. Of course, we do have bits that are going to end up going to chippers and going to biogas and other things. So, but we're just, we're so small time, we're trying to get to the next level, but it's just such a small industry. And, we try to go after grants, and, the big recycling companies tend to get those grants. So just trying to find a way to go from being small to mid-size.
And would those grants be, just so I understand, for building something or collecting more? Are you essentially collecting, hauling, and taking to a processor or a disposal site, or do you have an active processing treatment site yourself? And I'm just trying to understand what your company does.
Yeah, we do both. We collect, we deconstruct, we collect, and we sell. We'd like to get to the point where we're processing much larger amounts from other people who are either deconstructing or collecting, but we just can't seem to get to that next level because we're all self-funded. Some of us are even nonprofit, but there are those of us that are for-profit.
Got it. My guess, just listening to the description, is it's probably more of a corporate type investment and more of a smaller scale, earlier stage. And if you were on an hour or so ago, the gentleman from the Closed Loop Fund was talking about what they do, and I think it's closer to his investment mandate than mine.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions, but I'm just going to take one more in the interest of time to stay on schedule. So I'll be forwarding you some questions. But this question is from Dan Adler. If state government funded pre-development work like CEQA via loans, would private investors be prepared to absorb that financing and retire that loan at the next phase of capitalization?
Oh, yeah, generally, yes. I mean, how it works when a private investor comes in and either buys or takes over a project from a developer or partners with a developer, they generally, and we do this, but this is the model generally, the private investor will compensate the developer for their development work and reimburse everything they've spent, right? So it's not like, folks like myself expect to come and just take something for free that's cost millions of dollars. That's the role of a developer. If I give you the example of a really efficient industry like the solar development industry, there are folks who just find sites and permits and then they hand it off because that's their role. And then there's someone else who's better at taking sites and permits and developing a project. And then there's someone else who's better at building it. Our industry in the organic waste side doesn't have that level of sophistication yet. And so it tends to be developers take it all the way up to construction. And then a group like myself will acquire it at that point, reimburse all that work, which could be 3 to 5 years worth of effort and expense and interconnect fees and permitting fees and engineering fees and all these things. And it can be millions of dollars. And we'll also pay, obviously, not just reimbursing, but pay a fee for that because that's the value of the developer. Hopefully that helped answer the question.
Thank you so much, John, for your wonderful presentation and for taking the time to answer questions. We do have a few more for you, so we'll be forwarding those to you.
I will
Just
look
really
for the
appreciate.
Thank you, Arlene. This has been a wonderful setup today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Jessica Bede. She's a program officer at the American Carbon Registry, where she's leading the effort to produce comparable and standardized environmental performance indicators for the green bond market. Jessica has a wealth of experience in developing standards by which to qualify project-level greenhouse gas emission reductions and the associated economic, environmental, and public health co-benefits. She also specializes in establishing metrics and tools to facilitate transparency in reporting. Jessica will be presenting on opportunities to access green financing and communicate benefits to investors. From the American Carbon Registry, I welcome Jessica Bede.
Thank you, Arlene. I just want to check if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can, and I can see your camera too.
Wonderful. All right, we'll just launch into it then. So thank you for the invitation. It's nice to join you all today. As stated, my name is Jessica Bede. I'm with the American Carbon Registry, or ACR, and we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to building confidence in emerging environmental markets. We're an entity of Winrock International, which is a domestic and international development organization. And ACR is a scientific standards body. So we're best known for our role in the carbon offsets market and launched our Green Finance Impact Program to help grow the green bond market and bring more precision to how the impact of bonds are assessed. I know you all are looking to come away with information about accessing private capital, and that's why I'm so pleased to be here to present today. My presentation will be quite different actually from the previous presenters though, in that I'll be talking about the bond market, the green bond market in particular, as a viable source of funding for waste management infrastructure. And I'll be honing in on the best practices related to communicating environmental benefits of your projects. So in the presentation today, I'll be discussing using bond financing for green infrastructure, what makes a bond green, growth within this market, and the desire for comparable metrics from investors, ACR's approach to delivering those metrics, and then specifically the methods and indicators that we have for the waste sector. So the American Society for Civil Engineers has estimated that it'll cost up to $4 trillion to update US infrastructure and make it greener and resilient to climate change. With a figure like that, we know that it's an immediate need to utilize capital markets to fill the multi-trillion-dollar investment gap in sustainable public infrastructure. And while it's not a new challenge, it is becoming increasingly critical. The figure on the screen here is from the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, and it shows the significant role that bond financing plays in public infrastructure. And in the waste sector, where there's a lot of public-private partnerships, I assume we have both local jurisdictions and private developers seeking funding, and either party can issue a bond. Local jurisdictions and joint power authorities likely have their own processes for issuing debt, but I do want to take a moment to give it a little shout out to the California Pollution Control Financing Authority within the Treasurer's Office here in California. And I believe they participated in CalRecycle's public funding webinar. But in case you missed it, I'm bringing them up in this forum because they have a pollution control tax-exempt bond financing program for businesses. And that program facilitates low-cost private capital through their role as a conduit issuer of private activity tax-exempt bonds to pay for the acquisition, construction, or installation of qualifying waste recovery facilities and equipment, among other things. So I'm also bringing up the CPCFA because they are actively issuing green bonds, which is great. So what is a green bond? I'm actually going to start with what a bond is real quick. So a bond is a debt instrument that can be issued by municipal entities, corporations, or multilateral institutions where the borrower agrees to pay the investor back at a stated rate and time. And bonds through the market are able to, or they enable investors to lend to the project, and you can get many lenders all at once. So in many ways, a green bond is the same as any other bond issued by a state or local government or corporate entity to raise capital that is then repaid. And what differentiates a green bond from its vanilla counterparts is that the capital raised by the issuance of a green bond is reserved for investing in projects with climate or other environmental benefits. However, there's no universally accepted standard or definition for what makes a bond green. But that's not to say that there hasn't been a lot of extensive work to corral the market around some degree of uniformity. And there's a handful of entities out there who have established voluntary guidelines, standards, and certification frameworks. And these efforts have contributed to building up the marketplace, both on the side of the debt issuer and the investor. So most notable among those efforts is the Green Bond Principles. And the Green Bond Principles focus on the use of proceeds and provide general guidance on the project categories that are commonly supported by the green bond market. And those are listed on the screen for you. And as you can see, it covers a wide array of investments from transportation to green buildings to biodiversity. And of particular interest to this audience, the pollution control or pollution prevention and control, the circular economy products and processes, and renewable energy generation. So this slide here covers the size of the green bond market. At the close of 2020, there was a cumulative global total of $1 trillion in issuances of labeled bonds since the first green bond was issued in 2007. And there's been continued growth in the green bond market, reported at 60% average annual growth over the last 6 years. Last year was a record for issuances with nearly $270 billion issued globally. And the United States had the largest volume of issuances by country at $51.5 billion issued, more than 10 billion of that being issued by US municipalities. So while there's been significant growth, green bonds still represent a relatively small portion of the overall bond market. And I bring that up to point out that with the scale of the need and the demand for these products from investors, the green designation is still underutilized. So what's holding the market back? That's really the question that was asked by California's previous treasurer after signing the Green Bond Pledge and partnering with the Milken Institute to answer that question and examine strategies for growing the market. So here are some report excerpts from a listening tour with investors and bond underwriters. We're very concerned about greenwashing. Issuer transparency and detailed disclosure are the most important factors in verifying bond greenness. Any issuer that develops robust reporting will have an advantage. I want to see the impacts described quantitatively. Make it as specific as you can at reasonable expense. And assessment should include measurement of greenhouse gas reduction when available. So that's what investors want, and it's where ACR's Green Finance Impact Program comes in. In a nutshell, our offering seeks to make it possible to better align capital with climate smart infrastructure. And by making impact quantification feasible and accessible to issuers and making those metrics accessible to investors, we aim to unlock better rates for borrowers and going to the capital markets to finance green infrastructure projects. So we're building up transparent and standardized methods to quantify the environmental impacts of bonds and focusing on the sectors and project types that are most applicable to municipalities. Our methods are accompanied by easy-to-use calculator tools that utilize some basic data that issuers and project proponents already have at their fingertips. And these tools can estimate benefits prior to operation, allowing issuers to confidently communicate the impacts to the marketplace at the time of the bond offering, which is critical to getting that lower interest rate. The methods can also be used by the issuer to compare different projects and the merits of different design elements in terms of their environmental impact at the design stage. So it has a few uses there. On the buy side, by providing investors with comparable data from a trusted source, ACR empowers investors to identify those bond issuances that fulfill their portfolio objectives around sustainability, whether a bond is labeled green or not. So the performance indicators allow them to get more granular rather than just relying on a green label, which to some comes with concerns of greenwashing. So investors can be more discerning about what they select, and that overall elevates the consideration of environmental impacts in the market. So before I get into the mechanics of what we offer, I want to take a step back and tell you just a little bit more, excuse me, a little bit more about Winrock and ACR. The Winrock International is a mission-driven nonprofit organization named for philanthropist Winthrop Rockefeller. And as a Rockefeller organization, we believe in good science and sound metrics, and that markets are the most effective and efficient way to address climate change. ACR fulfills this larger objective with its mission to build confidence in environmental markets to accelerate action on climate change. And we have a successful track record and decades of experience supporting similar first-of-its-kind initiatives. ACR was founded in 1996 as the first private voluntary greenhouse gas registry and joined Winrock in 2008. In 2012, ACR was approved as an offset project registry for California's groundbreaking cap and trade program. And to date, ACR has enabled the issuance of credits for over 160 million tons of verified emission reductions. So we really have like the exact kind of expertise and experience in the quantification, reporting, and verification of environmental claims that the bond market is looking for right now in its desire to bring about more effective impact disclosure. So that brings me to our offering. And really, it centralizes itself around quantification of impacts, which allow issuers to enhance their reporting to investors. This in turn allays investor concerns around greenwashing in the marketplace. And by producing transparent methods and easy-to-use calculator tools, we enable issuers to provide the quantified key performance indicators investors are looking for. So our work makes it easier for issuers to translate the project data they already have into standardized, evidence-based, and transparently quantified environmental metrics. We build off on and contribute to the ongoing efforts within the marketplace to harmonize impact reporting. So to support that effort, we choose metrics that align with the sector-specific performance indicators recommended by the International Capital Markets Association. And on top of that, we calculate benchmarks that serve as a representative standard of performance and facilitate measurement and comparison of impacts across investments in the same category. So because our products are designed for use both before and after project implementation, borrowers can use them as a screening tool and decide what to fund with their proceeds. And then by using ACR's tool and relying on us as a trustworthy source of quantification, issuers bolster their claims and environmental credentials at the bond offering. And the tools also provide a way for borrowers to do their ongoing tracking and reporting on project performance over time, which is something else that investors are looking for. So for today's presentation specifically, I'm going to be getting into two methods that we have for the waste sector, dealing with the diversion of organic waste for anaerobic digestion and composting projects. Our methods serve to document the process for quantifying environmental benefits, assessing the impact relative to the benchmark, and substantiating contributions to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are commonly cited in green bond issuances, even domestically. So if you're unfamiliar with the SDGs, a project that diverts municipal organic waste has the potential to align with the particular goals of climate action, clean energy, sustainable cities, and land restoration. So our methodologies are technical documents, and as such, they're not particularly captivating reads, but that is why we have our calculator tools to accompany them. For organic waste diversion projects, we use inputs like your technology type, the feedstock quantity and composition, your products and byproducts, and some basic information about the landfill from which material is diverted and the project operational life. And we take those inputs in order to then calculate your impacts, including greenhouse gas emission reductions, landfill diversion, energy generation, and compost production. And then from there, we normalize those metrics, meaning that once we know what the impact of the project's impact over the duration of the project's operational life, we'll annualize those impacts and also evaluate them on a per dollar basis. So one of the standout metrics is the Ghg Yield, which is the emission reductions per $1,000 invested per year of operation, which is a nice snapshot for bond buyers. So we began publishing our methods in the waste sector. That's actually the first sector that we initiated this work in part because of SB 1383 and knowing that there'd be a great demand for this kind of infrastructure. But we do anticipate releasing methods to assess investment in wastewater treatment, green buildings, transportation later this year, and then we'll continue to expand into additional sectors in the future. And if you're looking to issue a bond for a different waste sector project type than the ones I discussed today, I would certainly encourage you to reach out as we are actively expanding our catalog of methods. But before I go, I just want to make clear something that I mentioned only in passing earlier, is that while we're absolutely delighted to serve and support the growing community of green bond issuers, our approach really does allow it to be used by other segments of the market as well. So we recognize it can be challenging for some folks to issue a bond where 100% of the proceeds are used for green eligible project types and make our tools accessible to all sorts of green finance and bond types. I'll just move on to our final slide here where you have my contact information. Thank you so much for your attention today. If you're interested in learning more, and I hope you are, I welcome you to reach out, but I think we might have a couple of minutes for questions now.
So we have one question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. We have one question from Cynthia Coulter. So let me see if I can unmute her. All right. Cynthia, it looks like you're self-muted. Nope, there you go.
Okay. Hey, Jessica, thanks so much. That's a really great presentation. I've heard of you and the organization and have done some work with the Rockefeller Foundation in environmental work. So kudos to you guys. I really think it's great. My question is, are you interested specifically also in smart city technologies?
I would see that as a definite opportunity for us to expand. And yeah, if that's something that you all are engaging in, I would encourage you to reach out and we can see how that might fit into our program and, see if there's opportunities to pilot something like that.
Fabulous. Okay. Thanks so much. I'll be in touch.
With that, I think we don't have any other questions. I just want to thank you so much, Jessica, for your time this morning and for your wonderful presentation. We're all clapping here for you. So, thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Max Vernier. Max is Vice President of Lending at Live Oak Bank and leads the Bioenergy Division. This group provides project finance for energy developers to develop infrastructure projects in rural communities throughout the U.S. Live Oak Bank is the largest SBA and USDA government guaranteed lender by volume for both 2019 and 2020. Since 2016, they've deployed over $1 billion of debt financing to renewable energy projects across the country. Impressive. Max Vernier of Live Oak Bank, take it away.
Oh, he's muted.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. And we can see your screen.
Okay, great. You can. Okay, good. Let's see here. Start the slideshow. All right. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Arlene, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. I realize I am now the person officially holding up everyone from going to lunch who's out on the West Coast. So I'll try to be brief here this morning. But thank you so much for the opportunity, Arlene, and everyone at CalRecycle. Really appreciate it. I know I've learned a lot this morning. This has been really good for me to attend and listen to all these really esteemed panelists. So I appreciate the opportunity to be up here and speaking with everyone. This has been really impressive. All right, so I will talk a little bit about who we are and how we are trying to help accelerate this circular economy as well. And kind of what differentiates us in the marketplace and the types of capital that we provide, and maybe give a couple of examples of some of the projects that we've funded over the years. But I guess I'll just start kind of saying, generally speaking, piggybacking on a lot of what was said today by some of the investors and some of the project developers, it's a really exciting time. We're seeing just a tremendous amount of activity and interest from all sectors, but especially the private investment community. And I think what's really significant is we're starting to see the cost of capital come down for projects like this. John had some really good points about parallels to other renewable energy industries like solar that are a little more mature and saturated with types of investment, especially debt. And we're starting to see that evolution here occurring in the organics industry and in waste to value. And I think that's really exciting. We're seeing this from some of the biggest banks in the world, all the way down to local community banks who are trying to support some of their family businesses, and even in the agricultural community, especially to other regional players like ourselves who aren't geographic necessarily, but try to reach out to these kinds of industries that need some help to grow, potentially with different debt products. So it's a really good signal. And I think, One of the things that we're seeing as a publicly traded company is even just on our quarterly earning reports and investor calls, our senior management team is constantly being asked, what kind of environmental, social governance, ESG initiatives does your company have, and how much capital do you actually invest into the circular economy? And so we're starting to see investors and folks who report on publicly traded companies start to measure and quantify those types of investments, which I think is really impactful. So to Jessica's points, we're seeing a really big emphasis on things like green bonds and quantifying and holding companies accountable for their actual investments into the space. I think that's really exciting. All right. So Live Oak Bank, we are a publicly traded bank, and in a traditional sense, we are a depository institution, and we use our deposits to fund our loans. So we're not a government we're not a government entity, but we are primarily a government guaranteed lender. And so we partner with the federal government and different branches of the government to extend debt to industries that are historically underserved or might not be traditionally bankable for a variety of different reasons: size, location, risk, a number of different factors. And so our goal is to become the nation's best small business bank in every aspect, in full suites of consumer products for small business owners. And we started in 2008, and we were primarily focused on different types of healthcare professionals and helping them manage their businesses and grow. And that has really blossomed into what is now a company that utilizes technology to creatively deploy capital to about 35 different industries. And we have a very verticalized approach. And so we effectively try to identify an industry that needs a specific type of debt product, create that product, oftentimes in collaboration with a government guaranteed loan program, and then deploy that to the industry and build a team of banking professionals around that industry to really cater to its needs, instead of another approach, which is simply offering a suite of products and hoping that it fits within a specific industry. So it's a different approach to traditional banking. So we started in 2008. We officially went public in 2015. And we've grown the company a bit, and now we're actually the largest small business lender in the US by volume of originations. So we are based in North Carolina, but we have a national lending footprint. So we're in all 50 states and US territories. And actually, this number is a little out of date here. I think we're up to 650 employees now. Most of us are based in North Carolina, but we have some remote offices throughout the country, and we have an office in Sacramento and another satellite office in Santa Rosa, California. So it's funny, we're on the East Coast, but our largest customer base is in California. In 2016, as we started to diversify the bank's offerings, we launched a project finance division. So historically, we were just providing capital for growth, acquisitions, startups for small businesses. And then in 2016, we started identifying opportunities in project finance. And the first opportunity we explored was the growing solar market in North Carolina. And so back then, we were providing growth capital for development companies. Most of those were actual developers. Some of them were manufacturers, but different companies in the value chain and the supply chain of the solar industry. And that team grew as well. And it has now expanded into what we call our energy and infrastructure group. And so it's exclusively renewable energy, but also more generally speaking, infrastructure financing in rural communities. And so it's a pretty broad spectrum. We now help folks, we do nonprofit lending. We lend to Native American tribes. We do some direct municipal lending, both loans and bonds, purchase bonds. We do private loans to developers and other small businesses that participate in the renewable energy sector, and a whole lot of other different opportunities in between. I just went through most of this. Yeah, another point there, and a lot of folks on the call probably have not heard of us because we do have, as I was talking about, our model is a little different. We're not a branch institution. So we don't have a brick and mortar locations around the country where you can go to an ATM or check in at a counter. We are a digital bank, and so everything we do is cloud-based. We're structured on the Salesforce.com platform, and so that's a little unique. But we do spread ourselves far and wide and try to go see all of our customers very frequently. This is a slide just to talk a little bit about our historical performance. So while we are a very young bank in the sector, a little over 10 years old, we do maintain a pretty low default rate. And we really believe that our approach to the market is what allows that. And it's the specialization within industry. It's the emphasis on site visits and really trying to cater to our industry instead of, again, offering a wide variety of products and trying to sort of pigeonhole or fit companies into a certain instrument. We are trying to create products that work best for our customers. So that brings us to the Energy and Infrastructure Group. So as Arlene introduced, we just surpassed the $1 billion mark. Again, that's since 2016. And our role in this industry in renewable energy is really on the small side of the market. So we are not capable, due to size, to fund large scale, $100 million projects. That's best for other types of debt financing. We typically provide loans as small as $250,000 and as large as $30 to $50 million per project. And so we think that better represents the small side or the small business side of the renewable or distributed energy market. And here's another reference to the different verticals that we have on this broader group. Solar, bioenergy. We do some other types of renewables like hydroelectric. We've done some wind. We're looking at a lot of combined heat and power opportunities and other energy efficiency installations. And then bioenergy is really our catch-all for the different types of projects that have been discussed on this panel already today. But generally speaking, advanced recycling technologies, primarily for organics. And here's some bad visuals for different types of projects that we have financed. But again, generally speaking, in bioenergy, we've historically targeted landfill gas projects to sequester methane and repurpose that as fuel or energy for the grid. Anaerobic digesters, composting facilities, other types of recycling centers. We're looking at some transfer stations and other facilities that try to separate or process organics out of MSW, and then a number of projects that would be considered bio-based product manufacturing. So in our partnership with USDA, we see a lot of projects that repurpose organic waste, not necessarily for energy, but for other types of beneficial reuse that range from fertilizer to animal feed to hopefully bioplastics and a number of other sellable products. So I probably don't need to spend too much time on this slide. I think the presenters that went before me did a really good job of explaining what makes a project financeable. And I would just emphasize that, the folks who presented the case studies earlier this morning, those are some of the best projects in the country, and they really are model projects. And so I don't know that I could add much more value than what they presented this morning. But again, back to my opening comment, I think banks in general are starting to push the boundaries of what is traditional project finance, or at least that's what we're seeing ourselves and a number of our competitors, which I think is really healthy in a lot of ways. I think, it depends on the type of project that a developer is trying to build. And it also depends on, back to some of the other comments, if it's a public-private partnership and how the incentives are aligned. I think John from Generate did a really good job of explaining it's important to align incentives and really understand the purpose behind a project, if it's supposed to be a profit center or if it's really just sort of a public resource that that's going to really inform the type of investment that should be made into that project. But from our perspective, again, our goal is to align with small businesses, mostly in rural communities, occasionally public-private partnerships, and build out and finance the construction of small-scale distributed energy projects. And so when we look at this from a project finance perspective, again, from a lot of what you heard this morning, we are doing heavy analysis on things like feedstock in the supply basin. You know, if it's a single source of feedstock, we're pretty heavily underwriting that that provider. You know, we do get into pretty granular review of the supply basin and understanding the micro and the macro economics of what is really driving the need to move and then recycle this material. And so we pay very careful attention to the different policy that drives those kinds of actions in the market, as well as the incentives that potentially make some of the economics of these projects work. But ultimately, it comes back to aligning the incentives of the parties that be. As far as technology, you know, we also don't take a lot of technology risk. I think that there is enough commercially available technology in the organics recycling sector to at least really start to proliferate a lot of the types of projects that, you know, the different states like California, New York, and Oregon and others are trying to accelerate. In North Carolina, we have a renewable portfolio standard as well here. So we don't invest in a lot of early stage technology that's still in the lab or bench scale. We do some commercialization of different technologies that have been implemented at scale that are ready to be added on to existing infrastructure. But for the most part, we are financing commercially available technology. As far as, you know, different revenue streams, I think the question that we get all the time is, how can a bank lend money for 10 years with a fixed payment at a fixed interest rate and underwrite the commodity sales and the carbon credits? And it's a really challenging question. It is. You know, in a lot of ways, we're hoping that this push from the investment community will help inform and structure policy and incentives that will provide for lower cost of capital and longer term financing. And I think we're already starting to see that. You know, there's already really good policy in place with, for example, the biomat tariff in California that's been alluded to earlier today, and other types of power purchase agreements if you're generating electricity. We see a lot of really robust green tariffs around the country. We have one in North Carolina that's specific to renewable natural gas, which has been really attractive and allowed a lot of projects to get built in North Carolina. And we see that increasing over time. I mean, it's no secret that there are a dozen states around the country talking about variations of low carbon fuel programs, or actually utilities, investor-owned utilities, who are trying to create green tariffs for their ratepayers. And I think that's exciting to see. We are able to take some commodity risk. It's a calculated risk, and it is challenging. And so I think as a project developer, again, it's important to decide what kind of investments you are looking for and what kind of project you're trying to build here. If you are, only interested in a really short payback and it's a profit-driven model, and you are pursuing, completely merchant carbon credit projects, that might not be the best fit for banking capital. And on the other side of that spectrum, if you have a technology that generates electricity and you're providing base load, and a utility is willing to pay you an above avoided cost rate for a long time and contract that, and you have a steady supply of feedstock with contracted tip fees, then maybe that can attract bank debt. So there's really a sliding scale there, and just keep in mind that risk is going to be priced into your cost of capital. Now, just a couple of quick examples of some projects that we've financed and some of the loan programs that we've utilized. So again, most of the capital that we provide is partially guaranteed by either the Small Business Administration or the USDA. We do provide conventional financing, and we do purchase bonds, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. But this is an example of a animal agriculture project that we financed about 5 years ago in North Carolina. And it's a system of covered lagoon anaerobic digesters that process swine waste into renewable natural gas. And you can actually see the RNG gas train over there on the right, and the flare is going off on the side. But this project was financed with a lot of different sources. It was financed with sponsor capital from the investors behind the project. It utilized 3 different grant programs, and then our senior loan, which was again partially sponsored by the USDA under the Rural Energy for America program. This is an example of a landfill gas to power plant that we financed about 3 years ago using an SBA loan. This is an organic conversion facility in Massachusetts. And for all terms and purposes, it's an anaerobic digester that generates electricity, and there's the engine here on the left, but it also has a depack machine, which you can see on the right. And we're seeing a lot more projects that are co-digesting different products, different post-consumer products, and generating electricity with those. And so we think these are really exciting. And then this is another example of a RNG facility. That's a pressure swing absorption unit there. Some aerial footage. It's a pretty large plant, and it supports a slaughterhouse, and it processes different waste streams out of that facility. And then finally, this is just an example of a wastewater treatment plant. So again, we have done some direct municipal lending, and we do purchases of bonds, both public and private. We are pretty actively participating in the CPCFA program out in California. They're a conduit issuer for pollution control and pollution abatement projects. And so for private placement issuance, when you have a developer or a triple P structure, we found that that's a great program, and we've participated a couple of times in that and other types of pollution control bond programs around the country. So ultimately, again, the message here, I think, is that the banking sector is usually the last type of capital to come into a new or growing sector. Hopefully it has one of the lowest costs of capital, because banks typically structure their debt investments to have the least amount of risk possible. I think that the organics recycling industry is evolving rapidly and growing in this country. And while it is still young, we are starting to see capital stacks that involve debt grow. And we're starting to see more of the investment community favor debt instruments on longer terms. We're starting to see longer fixed price contracts, both for feedstock and offtake, both from a policy and a voluntary perspective. And so those are all positive signals to us in the banking community. And I think that will be really important as we move forward to try to scale the industry, both on a large scale, but also on a distributed effort as well, which is really important. Live Oak is traditionally a small business lender, but we do have a project finance team, and we focus primarily on rural infrastructure. We like to be creative with our debt. The last thing that we want as a bank is to be very rigid in our structure and force a certain payback schedule that might not be in the best interest of the project or the business operator. And so we like to maintain flexibility in that regard and try to design a product that works for the project, again, instead of the other way around. I will say that the USDA has a number of grant programs that a lot of our customers have used. Some of those are available for front-end pre-development costs, like going through the environmental permitting, especially out in California. Some of those are reimbursement grants that come in during or after construction. We're not a grant writer, but I do recommend reaching out to your local rural development office and speaking to them about different opportunities for USDA grants. and those can be paired with USDA loans. And a lot of our folks have taken advantage of that to really drive down the overall cost of capital of the project. And with that, I'll probably wrap things up and see if there's any questions.
Thank you very, very much, Max. We do have a question for you, and this one is from Kelvin Garvin, and his question is, does Live Oak consider investments in closed environment agricultural modules for hydroponic farms in rural and urban environments?
That's a great question, and the short answer is yes. We do consider them, and we have funded just a handful. I want to say that we've done a peanut growing operation in the Southeast, and we are looking at a tomato growing operation in the Pacific Northwest, and a small handful of others. One of my counterparts on my team, who's a USDA expert, formerly worked with the agency, works on those types of transactions, but we do have a small footprint in that type of agriculture. We're not a large agricultural lender. We typically partner with different types of farm credit services and agencies and other local banks because we're not really good experts in row crop agriculture, but we are starting to explore that space further. Most of our involvement in that industry has been through energy efficiency installments. So we've financed a lot of things like LED lighting or on-site solar or combined heat and power units, even in some instances, to help lower the carbon footprint of different agricultural operations.
Perfect, thank you so much. We have another question. This one is from Steve Loutsey, and his question is, today's most excellent program has been almost totally focused on AD and energy production from organics. Since you list compost as an area of interest for the bank, can you discuss let's see here. Just a minute. Discuss how you approach investments in compost facilities which deliver greater soil conservation.
Sure. Yeah, so we have invested in 3 composting facilities. 2 of them are almost exclusively wood waste. And so they happen to partner with municipalities who are having volume issues at their landfill. And they do have organic diversion programs, but they're not as robust as 1383, for example. So they're not in the state of California, but they are source separating and basically taking in the wood waste. They're shredding it, chipping it, and producing a more traditional mulch product that's going into the garden, into the home gardening and landscaping sector. One of our other projects is post-consumer food waste composting. That's more of an aerobic system. And we used the same kind of financing that I mentioned before. We used an SBA loan for that company to help grow and build out one of their next facilities. On the 2 wood waste compost facilities I mentioned, that was conventional lending. Those 2 projects were not eligible for USDA, and so we used just conventional loans to provide capital for them to purchase equipment, to also make leasehold improvements at the site, which was adjacent to the landfill. And then we're looking at a handful of projects right now. Some of them are aerobic, that their primary business model is to collect tipping fees as part of an organic diversion program. One of them is an anaerobic system whose primary objective is to generate electricity, but then they also have an agreement to move some of that digestate material to a local farmer who has a beneficial reuse. And then we're also actually working with a hauling company to provide them some growth capital, and they focus exclusively on diverted organics and in partnership with a composting company. So we're sort of involved in a couple of different parts of the supply chain of composting. only 2 of them have been sort of project finance, and the rest have been growth capital for small businesses who are involved in the composting community. I hope that answers the question.
Well, I'm sure it does. And if it doesn't, they can get back to you. But which leads to another question. And a couple of people have asked, or at least one person has asked, what your contact information is, because it's not here on the last slide.
Sure, sorry about that.
No.
I could type that to the group.
And then while you're doing that, I can double back and ask you or clarify what Kelvin Garvin meant when he was asking about the agricultural modules for hydroponic farms. He sent in a clarification and said he was specifically talking about microgreen farming in South Central LA.
Okay.
This is a point of clarification.
Sure. Yeah, so it's not something that we've done, but I think it's something we would take a look at. Sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions that I have. Let me look at our other inbox just to make sure that that is correct. And it is. So I will hand it over to Arlene to take us home. Thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Max. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we are at the end of our webinar, and just a big thank you to all the presenters today, and to you, all the attendees who made this worthwhile. Again, this webinar is recorded, or was recorded, and we will be posting it on CalRecycle's website along with a private or public financing webinar that we gave last month, in case you missed it. Any questions that we didn't get to today will be addressed, and we'll be reaching out, forwarding them on to the presenter, and they'll be reaching out to you. Thank you so much, Marshall Graham and Frank Severson, for your assistance today behind the scenes and to help put this webinar on. Have a wonderful day, everyone.